Hi brothers, welcome. We've been talking on our Ning site and in our Flesh and Spirit community about what is your spiritual practice. And to deepen some of that thought in that conversation, and we'd love to welcome you to the Ning site. So if you're not a part of our conversation on the Ning site, just send me an email at kirkprine@fleshandspirit.org and give me your email, and we'll get you onto the Ning site so you can have this conversation. But as we've been reflecting on what's your spiritual practice, one piece that I know as queer men and as Flesh and Spirit community, we know something about, at least a little bit, and that is that pleasure is a big part of our practice. And so what I want the conversation to move into right now as we play on Ning site and as you just kind of look at this video is what brings you pleasure. And I'll seed some ideas for you for just a second. So, some years ago, I think it was even the FBI started doing some studies, but some studies were done on places where people meditated together in groups. And what they found is that in the areas in where people meditated, there tended to be less violence. And so if you think about pleasure in terms of meditation, and what if in you just having feelings of pleasure, you could actually change the world. So that's the big picture. But the bottom line is I want to reseed the idea about pleasure. In much of our history, pleasure has been separated out. Sexuality has been separated out. The body has been separated out from the spirit and the holy. And in our community, and what we know from the ancient wisdom, is that the erotic and the spiritual are one and the same. So the more we can invite ourselves into meditations that actually change our vibration because we're in pleasure, we're going to change the world. So what brings pleasure to you? The other day, just had a few spare minutes and was picking up my beloved who was at yoga class, and it was right next to the ocean. So I drove down to the ocean and just for 10 minutes walked along the ocean, picked up some of these sand dollars and felt the warm sunshine on my body, felt the breeze coming in, heard the rush of the waves. And in 10 minutes, I was absolutely changed. It was clearly a meditation for me. It was clearly about being in my body. My beloved, I'll show you his ropes. Aren't these cool? So my beloved now has these ropes, and as he's teaching yoga here in our studio in San Francisco and in his daily practice, he uses these ropes to get folks and himself into some asanas that really open up the body in a big way. So that's another way of meditating, of really coming into the pleasure. And for those of you who enjoy yoga, it's that edge of moving into the asana that stretches you beyond your comfort zone, that brings you into pleasure. So for my beloved, that might be one way of bringing pleasure. We just did in a wonderful time with our ecstatic massage training day here in San Francisco. And if any of you are around, please come and join us for the next one on March 19th. But what we did was we touched each other. And for me, what I know is that queer men touching each other with intention becomes a meditation, becomes a transformation, and really becomes a spiritual practice of opening ourselves up to pleasure. So the more, I believe, we can really come into knowing that pleasure is about the holy. That pleasure really is, when you're really, even when you're just with an intimate partner and you're feeling some pleasure, when you're in that pleasure, you are so in the moment. There's nothing really, anything else happening when you're fully in pleasure. And what could be more whole and holy than when you experience pleasure? So, what is your pleasure? What brings you pleasure? Is it through touching your body? Is it through nature? Is it through other ways of connecting? But what brings you pleasure? I think of immediately of my beloved too, just playing his violin and his viola and getting ecstatic, just playing and opening up to channel music, or playing music of some wonderful piece, whether it's a Taizé piece or one of the classical composers. His body goes into an ecstatic space of pleasure. So what is your pleasure? What is your pleasure that becomes then, with attention and intention, your prayer? Because if we can come into our bodies and really reclaim pleasure as holy, we, just like the meditators who come together in groups, will be the meditators through our bodies that change the world and bring more peace and less violence. So, seeding a few thoughts just for you to germinate on, talk about it on the Ning site, have good conversations, meditate on the idea of pleasure, and thinking of pleasure now as prayer. So I'll close with that. Namaste.